The warmest of greetings to you, and welcome to Happily Ever Teaching. This is the podcast to help you enthrall your learners in every subject under the sun using the best teaching method known to science, storytelling. To do this, we feature special guest educators who are passionately keen for your children to become amazing and successful human beings. I am storyteller Chip Cahoon, and with me today is...
Toria Bono. I am a Year 4 teacher in a large junior school on the South Coast, and I am the host of the podcast Tiny Voice Talks.
And I'm Helen. I'm a teacher currently in a mixed reception Year 1 class, teaching in Buckinghamshire.
And we have an extra tinier voice from Toria here because she's just off the back of a really bad cold. But thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, you're so welcome.
And we're very pleased to have you, our listener, with us as we explore personal, social, health and emotional education with a stupendously silly story from Russia. So for all the fun and effectiveness of story-led learning, let's don our finest hats, sprinkle some fairy dust, and hang tight to our magic carpet as we dive into this week's story. The farmer's wife just can't stop telling everyone everything. But if the king learns about the gold treasure they found, he'll snatch it from them. How can the farmer help his wife keep their secret? The farmer was too busy thinking about what would happen when the king heard about the gold. They would be accused of stealing. How else could a farmer have so much money? The gold would be taken away by the king, and the farmer and his wife would end up in the dungeons. He didn't want that to happen, not to him or his wife. He needed a new plan. By the time the sun came up, the wife finally fell asleep, but the farmer crept out of bed, put on some clothes, and hurried to the village market to put part 1 of his plan into action. From the baker, he bought 3 loaves of bread. Then he went to see the fishmonger and bought 3 silver fish. Finally, he went to the butcher and bought the longest string of sausages you have ever seen. Then he made his way into the forest to put part 2 of his plan into action. And if you and your young learners want to see how some bread, fish and sausages could help the farmer keep him and his wife out of the dungeons, you can download our sister podcast, Fables and Fairy Tales, or search our website, epictales.co.uk, for The Fish in the Forest. There you'll find a video of me telling the story that you can share with your children. And if you sign up as an Epic Educator, you'll also get a copy as an ebook or paperback illustrated by the magnificent Mario Coelho, as well as the full audiobook for you to download at any time. There are even some tips there for telling the story yourself, and a whole heap of resources to go with the lesson ideas we're about to discuss, including extra lesson ideas that we maybe didn't have time to fit into this podcast. Right now, though, let's begin our discussion with Helen and Toria here by asking, folks, did you feel really lucky to have seen this story?
This story is one of my absolute favourites. It's just so slightly bizarre and surprising. And I didn't know when I first read it a while ago, I just didn't know where it was going each step of the way.
Absolutely. It is just, as Helen said, utterly bizarre. And every time you think you know what's going to happen next, you're just so incredibly wrong. I mean, it really lends itself to a great deal of prediction. Just throwing that out there. I know that we're not even on English, but just lends itself to prediction from the offset. And basically, your young people will never manage to predict what's going to happen because it is so bizarre.
Do you know, I've just realised the last time we had you two together here on the podcast, I think it was to discuss the Basket Babies story, wasn't it? Which was a similarly bizarh tale that defied your ability to predict anything. So clearly we're getting into a bit of a habit with this.
Look forward to which one comes next to the both of us.
Absolutely.
But what was in here that you would want to discuss with your young learners, though? Is there any moral in this wacky, bizarre, all over the place tale?
The thing that rung out for me throughout is gossip. Positivity, negativity. That sounds weird, positivity around gossip. But actually, I've been reading research, which we'll come into later on in the podcast, about when gossip can be positive. But actually, for the PSHE, what I really felt was looking at gossip and the negativity around it, and really, why we need to try and avoid it. But actually, in this day and age, more than ever, it's really, really hard to avoid gossip. Yeah. And I will unpick that further, but I'm sure you found similar sort of themes within yours, Helen.
Very much so. I mean, I sort of, for the younger age group, I've titled it sort of Keeping Secrets, and all about secret keeping and when people keep secrets, and is it okay to keep secrets? Is it ever okay to keep secrets? I thought that'd be a good discussion to have with the younger age group, and make it like a really open discussion without necessarily saying, oh, you're wrong, no, we must never keep secrets. Just let the children talk about it, about when they might have kept secrets and when it might not be okay to keep secrets. And then from a safeguarding point of view, I think I thought it would be a good link into that more serious discussion. Perhaps have a session where you're talking about when children shouldn't keep a secret. And also I had a thought to maybe link it to the NSPCC. They come round and do assemblies and things for children. So I thought it could start off with almost quite a light-hearted discussion, because it is a fun story. It's a really funny story. And the secret keeping in the story is all fairly light-hearted, isn't it? But I thought it was a really important theme to discuss.
Yeah. I mean, both of you have picked up on the fact that elements of this story, the PSHE elements even, are presented counter to how we normally teach them. So we normally sort of teach that gossip has a little bit of a negative connotation, I'd expect. But here, obviously, there's the fun side of it, and there's the fact, the connection that it has, the fact that the story ends with gossip actually being seen in a positive light because it allows the story to carry around. You've also got the secrecy, which you mentioned, Helen, and then of course the one that I found when I share this story with young learners, and I like to ask, what is it that you learned from this story? The big discussion that always comes up is about lying, because of course children are taught it's a bad thing to lie, but sometimes if you are keeping secrets, as the farmer does here, he has to lie, and his lie effectively saves him and his wife from going to the dungeon. So there are some very interesting moral dilemmas that are thrown up by this story. It's a very good introduction to showing how life is not black and white.
It truly isn't.
Along similar lines, Chip, I thought it'd be interesting to almost start this, maybe before we've even told the story, with having a bit of a what would you do activity. So almost setting up scenario. This would work particularly well with young children that would be completely drawn in, where they find treasure on the school field. And they find something. You could have real money. You could have something that they want to keep, and to do with that sort of theme of honesty and lying, and find the treasure together, and then say to them, what are we going to do next? Like what would they do with this treasure?
It's funny, actually. I was walking behind two children the other day, and they'd found a £5 note. And the conversation between these two children, and who didn't realise I was standing behind them, went along the lines of, we need to give this in. No, let's keep it. Let's go and get sweets. No, we can't do that. Yes, we can. No one will know. We'll know. And it was really interesting because this went on, this absolute dilemma between the two of them. And every so often, one would swap over to the other one's way of thinking. And eventually, I've got to say, I actually eventually intervened and sort of helped because I'm a teacher at their school.
I thought you better step in there with a bit of moral guidance.
How old were they?
But it was really interesting because actually they didn't instantly pocket the fiver and run. It was a really interesting one. They didn't have an adult there sort of guiding the conversation initially or anything. And yet they were having that conversation that you were talking about, Helen, where they were really trying to work out what was the best thing to do with this £5, which to them was treasure. £5 is a lot of money to a little person.
A lot of sweets.
It's a lot of sweets. So what is it you do with it? Well, no one will know if we have it. No one saw us taking it.
How old were they?
They were 9 years of age.
Okay.
So they were in that perfect age bracket for actually, there's a level of independence there, but also, I was actually really proud of them with their final decision around the whole thing.
I think that was a perfect moment because it sounds like they were having the sort of conversation that if just one of them had found it, they would have been having that same conversation in their own head.
Absolutely.
But you got to hear it out loud.
It was fascinating. And I actually said well done to both of them, at the end for the decision that they made.
I know you intervened, but could you tell which way the conversation was going?
It was really funny. It was swings and roundabouts. It was going one way, then the other. I think eventually it would have made what I would say was the right decision. But that's the right moral decision, I do think they would have got there. But it was really interesting listening to the two of them and the debate around it. I felt very honoured that I was wandering behind, quite innocently and then just, fell upon it.
Absolutely.
This makes me almost want to change the sort of activity that I've just talked about so that the children find the treasure with an adult not present. Or like nearby, but like not there when they find the treasure, so that you can begin by listening to their thoughts, their genuine thoughts without an adult there about what they should do with it.
Of course, then you have other potential safeguarding / health and safety considerations related to surveillance.
Absolutely.
If only we could spy on our children.
If only we could set up cameras all around, like on the Secret Life of what's that TV program? Secret Life.
The Secret Life of Toddlers. Yes.
Toddlers for your and then can see what they actually really think before a teacher's there. I strongly suspect my children being the age they are and just being who they are, I imagine they just run up to me and say, look what we found.
But I think it is fascinating because I think, I've got 32 children in my class and I would love to hear the conversation between various pairings. And actually, what would be really interesting is the conversation between the same child but different pairings, if that makes sense. How they would be with different.
They'd be influenced.
Would they be influenced, or would they stand in their, in their power and go, no, actually, I'm going to be honest here. I'm morally correct.
But I think we're starting to talk more about an experiment for teachers to run rather than an experiment for the children to run.
But I think it's fascinating.
There's certainly some fantastic discussions you could have because, I mean, a really popular phrase, and it's a phrase that's full of rhetoric, is the old finders keepers. So, there's that whole sense, if you find 20p on a pavement, you pick it up and pocket it. You don't think about it. If you find £5, well, it's starting to go up in scale. And if you were to find that in the middle of a town, I suppose, again, you wouldn't really know where to hand it in, so you probably would pocket it. But if you did find it on the floor of a classroom, well, that's it's all showing you how important the context of the finding is. If you find that £5 down the back of your friend's sofa, chances are you wouldn't go by the whole finders keepers rule because you're in their house. So all these sorts of fascinating conversations and dilemmas to explore with your young people.
I think a lot of this lends itself to discussion, which is the stuff that my lesson ideas for this, for the upper key stage 2, was very much around discussion and actually understanding gossip. And I found this fabulous picture by Norman Rockwell, which was actually, it was a picture from 50 years ago representing gossip, and I absolutely loved it. And I just, I thought it would be a great one to show the young people to start with. What does this represent actually? And hopefully they would say it looks like gossip, because I think it does look like gossip. And actually what I found fascinating is it's 50 years old. So actually, did they imagine that their grandmothers gossiped? Did they imagine that old people gossip? Because what is gossip and so on? Because it's a fabulous picture. And then I found another picture just of some people holding mobile phones. And actually, what does this represent? Potentially gossip as well, because actually gossip today looks different to gossip 50 years ago. We're not on the telephones talking anymore, or we're not over the garden fence,
Yeah.
But a lot of the time people are on their phones, texting or, DMing, or if you're, according to my daughter, it's all Snapchat at the moment. If you dare to say that you're DMing or texting, you're really out of the loop. But I just thought that conversation with upper key stage 2 would be a really useful conversation as to what gossip looks like, how it looked like in the past, how it looks like now. But then actually linking that in to digital safety and actually the importance of remaining safe online, where gossip becomes nasty. And I think that there's an awful lot, as Helen says, there's an awful lot of places to go with the little ones with this, but I think there's a lot of places to go with the older key stage 2 children with this as well. Really unpicking the power of gossip.
Yeah. And would you end then with a sort of digital safety project or maybe even an art piece?
Yeah, that was what I was thinking. And funnily enough, I do come on to that in art. I think it really would lend itself to actually doing something, the modern version of that piece, because I think, it's absolutely fabulous, that piece, depicting, people chatting to each other, and actually what would that look like today? How would that look? And a lot of the time it is just mobile to mobile.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sending that over. That's going to be in the resources for EPIC educators to download, and we'll explore that more in our session next week on art. But just coming back to your idea, Helen, for the younger ages from 4 to 7, the whole keeping secrets thing. Obviously, yes, there is the bad side of keeping secrets. So how would you balance this? And are you heading towards some kind of display that your children can create?
I think to balance it, because there are times when we all keep secrets. So I think I'd look at the farmer in the story and get the children to understand why he was keeping secrets, or he wanted to keep secrets, and what happened when the secrets, what would have happened had they not kept the secret. But also in everyday life we keep secrets. Things that are very relevant to children are birthdays and Christmases. People keep secrets.
Parties.
Surprise parties. So I think you could generate a lot of discussion about when secrets can be a good thing to keep. And you could almost set up a scenario where your class is going to do something nice for someone but wants to keep it a secret, or something like that, so that they actually see the value of secret keeping. Because, as we also know, young children are actually pretty bad at keeping secrets. I've so many times I've had someone in the class come up to me and just tell me something that I think there was once I was getting married and they'd made me a beautiful card and they weren't supposed to tell me, but about 3 of them came up and go, we've made you a card, we made you a card. So actually it'd be nice to set up, it'd almost be quite a challenge, wouldn't it, for them, if you set up a scenario where you were doing something really nice for another member of staff and you were like, this is a good time to keep a secret. Can we keep a secret if we actually really try.
Mm.
Yeah.
I wonder, it's maybe more of an activity for the higher age range, but whether you could come up with some sort of system for deciding whether a secret is one to keep or one that should be shared. I don't know, maybe this is something that the NSPCC do. I don't know. Do they encourage children to come up with a kind of, like a flow chart for deciding whether to keep your secret or share it?
I don't know actually whether they do that, but I think it would be really valuable to do with all age groups actually.
Yeah.
The work that I've done with the NSPCC in the past, they haven't necessarily done it as generically as, decide whether this secret should be shared or not shared, because usually it's around safeguarding concerns that they're talking.
Yeah.
But I think it's very much unpicking, like Helen's saying, with the young ones, with the older ones, unpicking which secrets to share and which not to share and why, and actually looking at the what is the why? Why do you not want to share them? And actually, what is the reason? And going right back to, the good in the reason as such. If the reason is a good reason, and actually it's for the good of others, then that's probably a good reason not to share it. But actually going right back and unpicking, and I think sometimes that's quite hard, even for the older ones in primary, that's a really difficult thing to actually unpick. Why do I not want to share this secret? I had a fascinating one in school the other day where someone came in after lunch and said, so-and-so's told my secret to so-and-so. And it turned out that the entire class knew the entire secret by the end of lunchtime. Because one person had told another person who had told another person who'd overheard.
Farmer's wife goes to your school.
Who'd overheard someone else, etc. And then what had happened was the original child had told the secret to everyone because he didn't want anyone to not think that he hadn't heard the accurate secret.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it's a really, really fascinating discussion.
Yeah. It's like the controlling the narrative thing that those in the politics are taught to do.
Getting the truth out there, or what they want to be out there.
Yes. The child that had heard it third, he had overheard it being told to the second person. So he'd heard it third. He then told loads of people. And I said, but why did you tell lots of people? He said, I'm not very good at keeping secrets. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to say, because I thought, wow, where has he heard that phrase? And if he hadn't been told it was a secret, would he have shared it as freely? Now, this is all stuff, these are all the things that go round in my brain. But I didn't actually have a couple of hours that day to spend on PSHE. I'd spent about 15 minutes dealing with the fallout of the secret.
And you didn't have this story then either?
I didn't have this story. No, I shall be using it in the future. But I think it's a really interesting one that we possibly don't give enough time to in upper key stage 2, because we feel that actually possibly they've figured it out, and they haven't.
I love the fact that they were trying to, like we said, control the narrative there, because that is essentially what the farmer does.
That's what the farmer's trying to do. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. He says, right, okay, so my wife is definitely going to share this secret. I know that's a weakness of hers. So what I'll do is I'll set her up to look as ridiculous as possible, should the king ever have a reason to quiz her, which he does. And I wonder, is that a PSHE element that you could be exploring with your young learners, that the whole idea of being it's almost like the whole history is written by the winners idea, isn't it?
Yeah. I think you're right. It is. It's about controlling that narrative. And actually, I mean, this has just popped into my head, you could, with Key Stage 2, possibly look at media publicity. You could look at how, do you know what I've been really obsessed with recently? And I apologise now, viewers, for this, but it's the Amber Heard and the Johnny Depp case. I'm really sorry. Well, it's because they are controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
And I think, okay, you possibly don't want to discuss Heard and Depp with I think if you're doing secondary, that would be the perfect thing to link in. But actually really interesting, looking at controlling the narrative and how the media does it.
Yeah.
So yes, that's my latest. And I'm still waiting for the verdict to come in.
And of course, I was controlling the narrative here because I wanted to get that point in right from the very start. Speaking of going in lots of different directions, there's one last direction I really wanted to take us in, which is thinking of the fact that this is a Russian folktale. And at the time of recording, Russia is not having a very good press at the moment. And I think right at the start, there was an attempt by some in the media to make sure the onus was very much on Putin. But I don't think that has stuck as well as they maybe wanted it to. And I just wondered whether this story may give you an opportunity to just remind your young learners that Russia is still a country full of normal people, real people as well. They have a connection too because they like some of the same things. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure where I'm going with this, really. I mean, is this a discussion that you would see coming out of telling a story like this tied to a particular part of the world?
I think absolutely. The fact that it's a Russian folktale gives us a way in to have a discussion about, the people of Russia, and that actually not everyone is going to, it's about not tarring everyone with the same brush as such. And I think it's about unpicking that, with children, because all too often we refer to, the Russians are doing this and so on. But actually, I think, I don't know about early years as much, Helen, but I know with Key Stage 2, you can have quite a decent conversation about this sort of stuff. And the difficulty they have is making sense of what the media is saying, or indeed what they're overhearing adults saying. And when they are listening to adults and they hear Russia is doing this, they hear Russia as in every single person in the whole of Russia.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think it's just having that discussion and unpicking that, because it's really hard for our young people to understand. It's really hard for our older people to understand, but to understand the fact that actually Russia is made up of, many, 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 many people, and most of whom are not involved in the war effort, in that regard. And I think it is, it's in a sense our duty to really ensure that children have that understanding. I mean, would you talk about it in the early years, Helen?
I think I'd be less inclined to talk about the war directly. It's something that if children bring it up in my class, then yes, we discuss it. But I don't necessarily draw their attention to it just because they're 4 and 5, and if they're not aware of the war, I think that's a good thing.
Maybe their parents are trying to protect them.
And I think they don't. If they happen to bring it up and they've come across it, of course we'll discuss it. But if they haven't, I'm not going to draw their attention to it because they're so young. But what I think is fantastic about this story and about the stories that we explore on this podcast is that they come from so many different places. And this, as with any of them, it's a really good opportunity just to introduce children and thinking of particularly my age range, to another part of the world. And it can be done in that positive, in that positive way where actually just look at some images of the country, some images of the people, listen to some Russian being spoken, just to normalize another part of the world that actually the children that we teach are likely to have very little concept of. And then if they do hear about Russia, about the war, that actually they've also got this other image of Russia in their heads.
Yeah. And that I think is the important side, which I think is what I was getting at, that we're helping them to build up their empathy for other cultures and realize that people all around the world are very similar to people in their very street, if not they themselves. And so it means that when you go into situations where you're watching the news and you're hearing bad things about a place, you can have a lot more empathy and sympathy for what's going on. And that's the sort of thing that's going to give us a future with fewer wars, maybe a future with no wars, the more we share these stories around.
Definitely. I think the more positive images of other people, other countries, other ways of life that we can start to embed in the children from a very young age, the better, really. I mean, with any story, I always start with this story is from. Then, of course, depending on if you're doing a whole project on the story, you can have a whole day focused on the country, or longer than that the stories come from.
Beautiful. That's sadly all we have time for today, folks. If you'd like to talk to us about anything you've heard in this podcast, or if there's a subject you're soon to teach that you'd like us to cover, you can find us on social media using @TeachHappily, or leave us a review using your favourite podcast app. Please also share this podcast with your colleagues and help us start a story-led revolution in classrooms around the world, so children everywhere can learn in a way that's effective, memorable, and enjoyable all at the same time. Tomorrow, the farmer and his wife will help us teach English. But right now, it only remains for us to say cheerio, and we hope to hear your story soon. So, cheerio!
And we hope to hear your story soon.